Today, I wanted to talk about Call of Duty Black Ops 7 and also Call of Duty in general and why the game series just is really in a bad place right now and why it's just kind of declined. And this will just kind of be more of an audio video more than anything, but I wanted to talk about it because I've actually been playing Call of Duty for a long time. I've started with the first Call of Duty, and I played a number of the Call of Duty games over time. I haven't played every single one of them, but I have played many of them, and I'd kind of consider myself, I guess, at least a little bit of a casual Call of Duty player. Played plenty of first-person shooters, but I'm not an obsessive Call of Duty fan. But that being said, though, I think that we can look at Call of Duty as a whole and just try to look at the series and see what's really gone wrong. And of course, many people have talked about many of their complaints, whether it's the microtransactions, the move away from kind of that gritty realism or skill-based matchmaking and things like that, which are all important contributions, but I think we can look at things a little bit deeper than that. And so all this is kind of coming from a person that's kind of, I guess, more of a casual fan of Call of Duty, or I guess like a mid-range fan of Call of Duty, someone that's not really obsessed with the series, because I do think that that is a pretty big group of people that just don't play Call of Duty anymore for various reasons. And I think it's important to look at that rather than just the hardcore Call of Duty fan base. So I think obviously that the most obvious trend that we've seen over time has been the kind of move away from the realism and the grittiness of the original Call of Duty games or the early Call of Duty games. And so originally you started off with that World War II aesthetic, but really things got really big with Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. And then of course, popularity with Black Ops and stuff like that. And I think that the thing about it is that Call of Duty has always, at least to me, kind of represented this kind of more military shooter that's very approachable, right? It's got that aesthetic of those very bombastic campaigns. It's got those gritty campaigns, or it's kind of got that military aesthetic to it. But over time, I think what's happened is you've moved away from that. And when you've moved away from that, you kind of alienate some degree of fans. So some of the newer cosmetics and stuff like that, it doesn't feel very Call of Duty to me. You know, Call of Duty has always kind of had its identity in this degree of realism, but it's not obviously a hardcore first-person shooter like Arma or Squad or something like that. But that aesthetic is important, and I think that aesthetic is important, I think, for a lot of kind of more casual fans of first-person shooters or Call of Duty in general, at least for me. And I think that you've seen that move away, and part of that moving away, I think, is obviously been for the microtransactions. So the microtransactions have been a huge component of that, trying to make more money off of some of these skins or stuff like that. But I think the other thing too is that it's just probably looking a lot at the success of Fortnite or something like that, that aesthetic that's kind of cartoony that has done really well in terms of expanding beyond one series. It's gone into all these multimedia franchises and selling cosmetics around that. And so I think that Call of Duty has tried to do that. It's tried to probably emulate what Fortnite has done very well. And unfortunately, you just can't do that super well because, like I said, at least for me, and I think a lot of people, they think of Call of Duty as that gritty, realistic military shooter, although it's still kind of arcadey and stuff. And so this is like a big problem, I think, with a lot of video games where fundamentally you have an identity with something, right? Whatever it is, right? Maybe it's kind of a realistic military simulator, maybe it's a realistic medieval game, or it's got some sort of aesthetic, whatever video game it is, whatever genre it is. And over time, I think that a lot of these studios try to make it more mass appealable, or they try to change the aesthetics to maybe push microtransactions or something like that. But at the end of the day, every single game has its target audience, and that's what it is. That's all that you can really do in the end of the day. And I think that this has really caused a lot of game series to kind of decline over time. And so I think that with the aesthetic part of it, you see that with Call of Duty. I think that you also saw this with other series like Halo kind of changing its identity. And when you change your identity, even for something as simple as the aesthetics, I think that can hurt things in the long term in terms of how people perceive this series and the joy that they get out of that series overall. I'm trying to think of a bunch of series that changed their aesthetics and were wildly successful with it and kept that going into the future. It's probably not the most common. I'm sure there are examples, but regardless, I think that is a key component behind Call of Duty's decline, at least in some respects. But I think another thing too, beyond just the aesthetics, whether it's the campaigns and the microtransactions and stuff like that, has been this kind of other component, which is the gamer in so many ways, I think has changed in a lot of ways. So when you look at old school first-person shooters, the campaign was like really a central part of the first-person shooter, and multiplayer was kind of an afterthought. And then slowly over time, multiplayer became a huge component in first-person shooters with stuff like Halo 2, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, other games. Obviously Counter-Strike and stuff like that has always existed, Quake, Unreal Tournament, stuff like that. But I do think that over time, the, I guess, average first-person shooter gamer has kind of changed a little bit. There's been this huge push, I think, in terms of microtransactions and monetizing things, which has affected many FPS games, and especially with it being one of the more popular video game genres out there, it's obviously pushed a lot of, I think, acceptance within the FPS space of microtransactions, of those cosmetics. And so as the video game industry has changed over time, and in particular FPS games, I think that people that are really hardcore FPS gamers, they've accepted and embraced microtransactions a lot more than I think other genres. But at the same time too, with the rise of streaming and YouTube content creators and stuff like that, I think that there have been a lot of people that have created a identity for themselves as like an influencer, as a streamer, particularly with FPS games, that has influenced the culture of that genre. And I think that at the same time too, because FPS games are very popular and you have these influencers, that affects the overall player base. And so I think there's been a lot more of a, I guess, push for people to be extremely competitive with these games, and people really trying hard to be the best, or to be a top streamer, or to try to be some sort of YouTuber or something like that. And I think that people were competitive back in the day with FPS games, but like now, I think it's a little bit different, especially when you have things like esports now. You have people making money off of streaming or YouTube content creation and stuff like that. And so that has kind of, I think, changed the player base. And then, of course, you have all these other things on the game development side that has changed it as well. So skill-based matchmaking and stuff like that, I think gets you a different player experience than kind of server browsers, where you're kind of in this lobby and the skill levels are all over the place, which to me is a lot more of a fun experience than this algorithm that's trying to match you to the right amount of skill to other players so that you win 50% of the time or something like that. That makes the game, I think, just a little bit different from the competitive experience, the multiplayer experience and stuff like that. And especially too, where with YouTube videos and stuff like that, I think a lot of people have tried to get better at the game. They tried to look at ways to improve, ways where people try to improve their aiming, or they look up tactics for maps and stuff like that with whatever FPS game is out there. And so that changes the competitive dynamic. It changes how people interact with the FPS genre in general. And I think that Call of Duty has that aspect as well, especially with something like Warzone. And of course, you have more prevalence with stuff like cheating, stuff like that, that really has, I think, changed the way that people interact with FPS games in general. It's just become a lot more competitive. It's a lot more focused on winning. And then, of course, you have the aesthetics of trying to appeal to a mass market. It's more popular now. And of course, you have influencers and stuff like that that try to promote the game and create this different culture around the game. Because the FPS games now are just so different than back in the day, or even just a couple of years ago. So I think that's a big component, because that competitive aspect with the game, the way that the game series just feels, I think, compared to the past, is appealing to some people, but it's not appealing to other people. And I think that over time, that has its negative effects on the game. And then I think another component, which people don't talk about enough, I think, is just the overall tiredness of the formula. There's just been so many Call of Duty games since the first one, and just this kind of annual release cycle with all these games. And after some point, you just become, I think, a little fatigued with it. Maybe if you're a hardcore Call of Duty fan, you don't, or you're an influencer, and so your main game is Call of Duty. But I think for a lot of people, it's just the same thing over and over again, and you get tired of it. Like I said, I've played a lot of the Call of Duties, but I haven't played all of them. I've liked in the past playing the campaigns, and that's fun, and playing a little bit of multiplayer, but that's it. I don't want to get to necessarily the max prestige rank. I have played certain Call of Duty games more than others, like the original Black Ops or Modern Warfare or stuff like that. But at the same time, too, that formula really hasn't changed too much. I mean, of course, you have things that are slight variations on the formula or some novelty. So you have zombies at some point. You have, obviously, the Battle Royale mode with Warzone, stuff like that. But at the same time, too, like the core Call of Duty formula is the same thing, where you're kind of in these small maps and you're running around and just kind of dying in 10 seconds and just trying to get eliminations and doing that over and over and over again, and grinding those weapon skins and all those other things. And so that can be fun, but after a while, you get this kind of fatigue with the game series and the gameplay loop, to the point where, like, for me, I look at a new Call of Duty release and it's just, oh, okay, that's cool. Maybe you might have a motivation to play one of them, but to be honest with you, a lot of times it's not. There's been times where I picked up one of the new Call of Duties, like Advanced Warfare or Infinite Warfare or something like that, but then I just like don't play two of them. So that's kind of how I've thought about Call of Duty for the longest time, because the formula gets stale. And there's actually a lot of video games that have this problem. Another good example of this is Assassin's Creed, where it's just, there's so many Assassin's Creed games, the loop and the formula is just the same thing, and it's just kind of boring. And the story is just not super compelling. And so it's just not worth it. And same with probably the Call of Duty campaigns. Like once you've played one campaign, you've had enough of it, basically. So I think over time, this formula has kind of worn thin for some people where they're just kind of tired of the Call of Duty campaign over and over and over again, or they're tired of the multiplayer, or they don't like the direction of some of these mechanics, whether it's the microtransactions, whether it's the skill-based matchmaking or stuff like that. And you just want something a little bit different. And maybe if you're a hardcore FPS gamer or you're a hardcore Call of Duty person, that doesn't matter. But as someone that plays a lot of different video games, and I play many different video games from many different genres, for me, it's like I've been there and done that. And so that's kind of coming from a more casual fan. And I think that that is probably true for a lot of other people. They played a couple of games, but that's it. It's just there's nothing new there. For me too, it just doesn't seem like the graphics really have improved that much over time. I mean, there is a little bit of it, but it just seems like it's very stagnant. And maybe some of that is because of that annual release cycle, and you just don't get a lot of innovation because you're constantly selling a new copy of the game. You're kind of stuck in this loop where you can't really get out of the formula and things get stale over time. And to be honest with you, I think that there's a lot of potential with Call of Duty to try to do new things. And I guess the campaign with Black Ops 7 has tried to do a little bit of newness with the weirdness of its campaign, but I mean, obviously it's not been well received. But I'm talking about kind of like taking FPS games to like a whole new level, rather than just kind of sticking to the same formula of the progression with the skins and stuff like that, or the small maps and that whole dynamic. Maybe that is something that people are going to continue to like, but to me, I've always thought it'd be really cool to try to change things up, take the genre to the next level, rather than just trying to be this printing formula of continually cycling out the games. Like something I thought would be like an interesting idea. I don't know how feasible it is, but it's just like an idea. And maybe you can't get 100% of it, but you can do 50% of it and get some really cool new video games out there like this. So take the classic Call of Duty multiplayer formula as an example. Well, what if you made the maps more modular? So the maps kind of changed from variation to variation, and there was a bunch of variations. Let's say there was more of like, I don't know, like 1 million combinations, 100,000 combinations, something like that. And so the maps kind of dynamically changed. So maybe like the center part of the map had this huge construction site, and then maybe the left side had this huge skyscraper, and then another variation would be something completely different. There's a bunker on the left side or something like that. And then it allowed for the map to kind of change in a way. And so now it's less about map knowledge and about how you transverse through the level from like a tactical perspective. You are kind of more mindful of verticality in the map, or you're more mindful of not rushing in. And so it requires a level of strategy because of the map. It leads to this dynamicism or something like that. Obviously, that kind of auto generation would be very difficult, but it's just like a random idea, right? Take the formula in a completely different direction, or take those classical Call of Duty maps and apply something like Battlefield, where there's destruction that can lead to the map changing in a way. Maybe you can move the left side of the map to be more open-ended, which supports sniper gameplay or close combat gameplay, something like that, where the map can kind of more dynamically change, and not just like a building is there and then it gets destroyed. Something a little bit more involved with that could lead to kind of tactical elements with the gameplay, right? Rather than kind of having these very static maps that we've seen for like 10 years or even more. So these are just random ideas to just think of like how to refresh the formula, or maybe really think about progression in a completely different way. I mean, obviously there's those simple fixes you can do, like trying to get back to the more realistic aesthetic to things, or toning back on skill-based matchmaking or cosmetics or something like that. But at the same time too, when I think about the FPS genre and moving forward to something new, I continue to think about like, what are ways to change the gameplay, whether it's that modularity that I talked about, or these kind of more evolved maps, or something different. I mean, because that is how you get this kind of fresh formula. That's how you get something kind of more novel that I think gets people that were kind of fans of Call of Duty, casual fans, back into the series. But of course, to do that, you have to spend that development time. You have to take risks and try innovation. And some of these ideas, they're just ideas in the end of the day. They might not work. Maybe you can only get 75% of it, but it's just, those are the ways I think that you can evolve the formula, because over time, it's just like after 10 plus games, 15 plus games, whatever it is, it just gets stale and boring, except for the most hardcore of fans. And you start losing, I think, casual people. And of course, the cultural zeitgeist of video games changes. So there's people that are more into a new game series, or something else kind of takes its place. Nothing stays super popular forever, but I think that when you kind of maintain your identity over time and you kind of stick to what made you great, and you kind of focus on that and try to innovate where you can, you'll get that loyal fan base, and maybe you won't be the most popular video game out there, but it's something more stable over time. As a kind of a casual Call of Duty fan, that's kind of what I think of as like the three central parts that are problematic for Call of Duty: microtransactions, the monetization aspect, the movement away from its aesthetic, And then, of course, just the staleness of the core formula. Of course, there are these other aspects that you can point to, kind of on a more nuanced, more mechanical level with the gameplay or stuff like that, which I think are valid points, of course. But I think from like a casual perspective, those are the big drivers in my opinion. And it's just something that I've kind of observed just playing Call of Duty over the years and just looking at it and seeing the most recent Call of Duty games and really not being too interested. So I think there's a lot of potential for Call of Duty in the future. Of course, there's the backing of a big company behind it, but I think that it probably would do well to try to innovate the formula or try to do things a little bit different or kind of go back to its roots in some ways. So let me know what you think. And hey, if you like this video, consider liking and subscribing. I make a lot of awesome video game content on my channel. Check it out, and I will see you in the next video.